Welcome, everyone. My name is Megan Carpenter, and I'm Dean of the New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to another installment of our Justice and Journalism series and our first ever virtual program. I firmly believe that a law school is not just kind of a school separate from the real world, but a place that we should have dialogue and debate and to be part of the fabric of the community. That makes it real. And so while COVID prevented us from having a program last year, and it's the reason that we're doing a virtual program tonight, we are thrilled to be back and to present an especially compelling event for you this evening. The Justice and Journalism series brings nationally renowned journalists to the Rudman Center for engaging conversations on public affairs and the public servants who create, implement, and influence public policy. The series is a joint initiative of New Hampshire Public Radio and the Warren B. Rudman Center for Justice, Leadership, and Public Service here at the law school. We value the partnership that we have with NHPR that permits us to offer this acclaimed series. And we're especially grateful to the Couch Family Foundation. The Justice and Journalism series is made possible by the generous support of this foundation. Some of the journalists we've been pleased to welcome to the Rudman Center in the past have included Peter Overby, David Folkenflik, Mary Louise Kelly, and Domenico Montanaro. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome NPR correspondent Ayesha Rascoe, who will reflect on the first year of President Biden's administration. She'll be joined by New Hampshire's very own Laura Knoy, who will moderate the discussion with questions from you, the audience. I'm pleased now to hand the program over to NHPR President and Chief Executive Officer, Jim Schachter. He's going to introduce Ayesha and Laura. Jim joined NHPR in October 2019 after decades as a journalist himself and a newsroom executive with some of the nation's leading news organizations. As president and CEO of New Hampshire Public Radio, Jim guides the vision and the strategy for the organization and leads a team of more than 60 staff advancing NHPR's public service mission. Jim.
Thank you so much, Dean Carpenter. And we want to thank you for your remarks and for the law school and the Rudman Center's longstanding partnership with NHPR and the Couch Family Foundation in this Justice and Journalism series. And thanks to all of you, wherever you are, for joining us tonight. This is my first one of these events, and I want to tip my hat to the people who initiated the series and had the wisdom to call it Justice and Journalism. The quest for justice, what Webster's defines as fair treatment, is at the heart of journalism's mission and at the heart of what we do at NHPR every day. When our reporting holds an official or institution accountable, that's journalism undertaken in the pursuit of justice. When a story focuses attention on people who are being denied opportunity or being disadvantaged by an abuse of power, that's journalism undertaken in the pursuit of justice. This has been the work of New Hampshire Public Radio for the last 40 years, and it's the mission that carries us forward. It's also been the animating vision of our partners at National Public Radio for the last 50 years. So I'm particularly delighted that we're renewing this series in this anniversary season for both NHPR and NPR. And while I too wish we could all be together tonight, I take solace in the reality that gathering remotely makes possible significantly higher attendance than has been possible in the past. I see the count as over 450 of us joining together tonight, while also fulfilling the original goal of this partnership, connecting our New Hampshire audience with the national resources of NPR. Plus, none of us have had to go outside on a 0-degree evening, so that's okay too. I could not miss the opportunity being here on Zoom with you to ask you to do one thing, just one thing, to advance our goal of building a better informed public here in New Hampshire. Here's the thing. Sign up for one of our newsletters. They are each a concise gateway to the news and information gathered by NHPR and NPR's journalists. You can sign up by going to nhpr.org/newsletters on your phone or computer or tablet. Please do just that one thing for us before the night is done. You're really doing it for yourself. Now, to the business of the evening. It is my honor to introduce our guest tonight. Ayesha Rascoe is covering her third administration as NPR's White House correspondent, a post that's taken her around the world and into the inner sanctums of decision-making during one of the most extraordinary periods in our country's history. In addition to the news, you may have heard her hosting Weekend Edition recently, and she's a regular guest on the NPR Politics podcast, and It's Been a Minute with Sam Sanders. She is one of a legion of extraordinary journalists who trained at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and who are our profession's current and future leaders. Ayesha will give some initial remarks, and then we'll put the reporter in the position of being reported on, interviewed, as you've heard, by someone you all know for 25 years of incisive questioning and informative conversations on NHPR, our friend and colleague, Laura Knoy. We'll want to hear from you as well. If you have a question for Ayesha anytime during the evening, please just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type it in. One of our producers will be reviewing those questions and sharing them with Laura to pose during the conversation. And with that, please join me in welcoming NPR's Ayesha Rascoe virtually to the Granite State.
Thank you so much. That was a very kind and generous introduction, Jim. So thank you so much for that. I'm not going to talk too long because I think these things are best when, we can get to questions and get to your questions. But I just wanted to just talk a little bit about my journey, how I got here, and tell you more about the work that I do. As was said, I am Ayesha Rascoe. I went to Howard University, majored in print journalism, and have pretty much wanted to be a journalist since I was in middle school. I was always taking my mom's newspapers and reading them. She pretty much got the newspapers for the coupons. And I was the one who would actually read the political commentary and all of that. And then I've also, I just always loved magazines and a lot of hip hop magazines when I was growing up. And I just wanted to be a journalist. I felt like I loved history and I wanted to write. I wanted to be able to, write the first draft of history. And that was my goal. And I've been blessed to be able to do that. I spent a decade at Reuters, Newswires, basically learning the foundation of my work as a reporter. I learned how to be fast. I learned how to be accurate. And I learned about how to get the facts out there. And working for a wire service, the focus is really on kind of the nuts and the bolts of explaining what is happening, why, what may happen next. It's not, there are some stories that can get a little more pretty and stuff like that. You could maybe play around with it a little bit, but it is really just the facts, ma'am. And so I got to do, I got to learn a lot. I covered energy for many years before I went on to cover the White House. I covered the last year of the Obama administration. And so that is where I kind of got my foundation. And I say now, since I've been at NPR since 2018, I've kind of been able to find my voice. And I've been able to, show other sides of my personality on the NPR Politics podcast. I can talk about politics, but also about Cardi B and Beyonce and things of that nature. On It's Been a Minute, I've gotten to talk about my love of horror movies and Married at First Sight and things of that nature. So that has been fun. Covering the Trump administration and now covering the Biden administration, what we have tried to do, during a pandemic, during, a very trying time, is to be able to provide people with facts and news that they can depend on and rely on, and trying to bring that to you in a way that's fair and in a way that you can understand. And so we hope to inform you, sometimes surprise you, but definitely hope that you come away from our news reporting having learned something new. And we're blessed at NPR to have, all of these member stations that do incredible work in their communities at a time when a lot of community news is, news outlets are not being supported. We have, reporters that are in the communities that know their communities so well, and add so much richness to the reporting, that comes out of headquarters, and to the reporting that we do, and to the reporting in their communities. And so, I'm always so grateful to listeners for supporting the work that we do, especially in the pandemic. I'm at home a lot. I got my setup and the mics and all that. And thank you for putting up with the kids coming in here and there. They may come in now. But being able to do that, it takes the support of the listeners. And so I'm always grateful for that. And anytime I do any of this and get to talk to anybody at these events, I like to say thank you very much for your support and for, all that you do to help make this work possible. And so with that, I will, lend it on to Laura Knoy. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Ayesha, and a big welcome to New Hampshire. Welcome to the Granite State. And my hope is that we can entice you to come back in person sometime, maybe not in the too distant future. But I agree with Jim. The great thing about this virtual format is we've got a lot of people who are attending tonight who would not be able to attend. So that's wonderful too. So it's great to have you. And it's great to have all these people watching online. Ayesha, let's start off with the news that just came down midday today. And that is that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Breyer has announced his retirement. From your White House perspective, what's the sort of political chattering about this at the White House right now?
The White House is being a bit quiet about it because Breyer hasn't officially announced, the news is out, he's going to announce, but he has not officially made the statement. And so they're trying to it's a delicate situation where you have the White House and you have, I was just at the White House an hour ago, and you have Biden saying, look, I will talk about this, but I want Breyer. He has the right to make a statement on his own when he wants to. So it's a very delicate situation because they don't want to make Breyer upset, and they want to give him a chance to, make his own announcement on his own accord before they go forward and publicly with their plans for a replacement. So you're going to have that little dance until you have him, go out and officially say, I'm leaving. But certainly they have been thinking about this. This is not something that is a shock to them. Biden has said he will nominate a Black woman to be on the Supreme Court. They have, people at the White House have said that and reiterated that. And so they plan to go through on that. And there's probably a short list of Black women who are judges right now who are on that list. But you're gonna see kind of like the rumblings until everything gets formal, the formal announcement that he's leaving and of that nature. But I think they're gonna try to move really fast because this is an election year and they don't know what's gonna happen after, November.
Right. So they're trying to, for now, give him the credit and the accolades that he is due, and then move on to sort of the next step in the process.
Yeah.
Speaking of the courts, as you well know, the Trump administration got 3 Supreme Court justices on the high court. Overall, Ayesha, how well has this new administration done in terms of getting judges that it likes on the bench?
They've actually been moving really fast. Just today you had, Press Secretary Jen Psaki talking about how they've gotten a record-setting amount of people of color on the federal bench. They've gotten a number of women of color on the federal bench. That has been something that they have been really laser focused on. And I think a lot of this has changed because you saw what happened under the Trump administration, where there was a focus from the very beginning. We are going to focus on judges and we're going to get people in. And you see now Biden, with the control of the Senate that they have, saying we're going to do the same. We're going to focus on now. The issue is, of course, they don't have the Supreme Court, right? Like even with Breyer, they're not going to have a majority on the Supreme Court. And on the federal courts, I mean, a lot of those appointments that Trump made, I mean, those are lifetime appointments, obviously. So you can't completely remake that, but what they can do, they are doing. They are getting people through. They are appointing judges because they know that that's a really big legacy or a huge legacy that a president can leave.
Well, it's great to be able to talk with you about this since it's just happened this afternoon. Let's talk about Ukraine, Ayesha, if we could. How has the Biden administration been approaching Russia's latest threats toward Ukraine? And just as an add-on, if you could, please, has that message been consistent over the past few weeks or has it shifted?
I mean, the message has been pretty consistent. They are, saying over and over again, they had a meeting. President Biden had a meeting I think it was yesterday or the day before. The days kind of run together. It might have been Monday, but had a virtual meeting with all of the European leaders and the head of NATO, talking about the idea that if Russia moves ahead with another invasion of Ukraine, that there would be sanctions and that there would be consequences that would be, some of the most serious consequences that they have seen, right? They are saying that there will be serious consequences. And, the thing that's not spoken, but is, kind of the undertone is that this will not be like 2014. This will not be like when they first invaded Ukraine, that there are going to be much more serious consequences if they move ahead with it. But you also had Biden last week kind of signaling that he does think that something is going to happen, that Russia will move ahead and at least do something. He talked about minor incursions, which got him into a bit of trouble because Ukraine said they don't think that any incursion would be minor. Right. They don't consider it minor, but that's what I think what he did in that moment was he spoke with a lot of, analysts and a lot of people who are familiar with the region think that at this point, with the amount of buildup of troops that Russia has, that Putin will likely take action, if nothing else, just to save face. But the diplomatic efforts are still going on, and they are trying to see if there can be an off-ramp to this conflict. So that work continues.
Well, and here we are, Ayesha, kind of reflecting back on 1 year of the Biden administration, in addition to talking about your work covering the White House. So toward that end, NPR reports that the president's ratings have dropped again, with only 41% of Americans approving of the job he's doing. As someone who's covered several administrations, not just this one, what do those approval numbers really reflect, Ayesha, for presidents in general and for this president in particular?
I think those approval ratings can tell a different story depending on the circumstances. I mean, I think in the circumstance with President Biden is those numbers are reflective of a population that is dealing with a pandemic, that is dealing with serious crisis and upheaval, with an economy that is completely unsettled, with life that is unsettled. And I think that this is a reflection of that. When you're dealing with inflation, when you're dealing with, uncertainty when it comes to jobs, like, yes, the jobless rate has gone, the unemployment rate has gone way down, but right. The US is still, far from recouping all the jobs that were lost in the pandemic. So it's such a difficult time. And then sometimes you have empty shelves, you have supply chain issues. All of those issues are, I think, reflected in the approval ratings. You do have some polls that say that even when it comes to issues like passing Build Back Better, which is, Biden's initiative with the social safety net and climate change and all of these other things that were a part of his agenda, that they don't even want focus on that. They really want focus on inflation. They're saying, they want the president to bring prices down. The problem for Biden is that a lot of this stuff is out of his control. Now, Biden doesn't say that, but the truth is presidents, yes, they have some control and influence over the economy, but they really don't have as much as people think. And the issue is that presidents, they get the credit when the economy is doing well, and they get the blame when it is not doing well, whether they are responsible or not, whether there's anything they can do or not. And that's not to say that Biden is not also suffering from some missteps on his part when it comes to Afghanistan. That withdrawal was a really big knock against Biden's argument that he brought competence and experience, and that is what he was going to bring to office. The Afghanistan, that withdrawal and the chaos of it really pushed back against that narrative. And then he's had not a lot of wins, right? They got the infrastructure, but then you had the Omicron variant, and people, once again, they're concerned about their kids and going to see grandma, all of that. It makes it very difficult when Biden came into office saying he was going to get the virus under control. So that's a very long answer of saying he's facing a lot of headwinds.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about that for sure. I mean, former Clinton advisor James Carville, who famously said in the 90s, I know you remember this, it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
Now said recently, it's the pandemic, stupid, basically saying, this latest variant surging has really just thrown a wet blanket, he says, on, everything the president says and does. But to what you just alluded to a moment ago, Ayesha, how did the president on Inauguration Day, a year ago, say he was going to approach this pandemic?
Well, their focus was on vaccines. They said, we're going to listen. Number one, they said they were going to listen to the science. They said they were going to bring this organization to it. And the biggest thing that they were going to do is that they were going to ramp up these vaccines. They were going to get people vaccinated. They said you mask for 100 days. We're going to get people vaccinated. And then there was this thought that there would be this freedom summer, that in the 4th of July, they were declaring independence from the virus. I remember at the White House, there was this point in the spring where the CDC had said, you don't have to wear a mask anymore if you're vaccinated, indoors or out, you could take, and at the White House, they were ecstatic. They took the signs down, everybody took the mask off. And there was a bit of jubilation because there was that thought at that point in May that you had the vaccines and that the US was turning the corner. And Delta was around, but I think there was a hope that Delta wasn't, going to be that bad. Well, it turned out to be bad. And then the CDC had to reverse itself. And so that freedom summer didn't materialize because you had Delta. And so I think there was a thought that if they could get enough people vaccinated, that if they could, try to get people to, do a little bit of social distancing, for a little while, that there would be this point where you could just turn the corner. And that didn't happen. That didn't work out. And so I think that's been difficult. Now, obviously, I have to point out that you have parts of the country where people have not gotten vaccinated at the same rates. You have, a lot of Republicans have, conservatives have said they have issues with the vaccine. It has become very much a political issue. And so that is also a part of this story. This isn't a story of the country coming together and everyone agreeing to get vaccinated. That has not happened. It has been hyper polarized and a real political issue, whether people get vaccinated or not.
You mentioned the economy, Ayesha, and you're right. It is sort of a mixed economy. I mean, the unemployment rate is so low. Here in Concord, New Hampshire, where I live, help wanted signs are everywhere. And yet we have 7% inflation. Not to date myself, but the last time I saw 7% inflation, I was, just out of high school, basically. So is this a political liability for the president and for Democrats, Ayesha?
Well, Biden got asked that question earlier this week. I was at that event and he said some naughty words in response to it, to a Fox reporter. And I think the reason why he might have gotten a little salty is because it is a liability. It's a very big liability. If people are paying more, it's going to be very hard to bring any political message to people when they are paying more at the grocery store. I mean, I think about my own mother. If you asked her on any day of the week, in the past 20 years, was she paying too much at the grocery store? She's going to tell you yes, that everything is too high. And so when you actually have prices really going up fast, that is a problem. People feel it in their pocketbooks. When people go to the gas pump and they are paying more, they are not happy. Americans do not want to pay more at the gas pump. Like that is just the American way, that we don't want to pay more than $3 at the pump. And so those are issues that politicians have to deal with. Now, what you will hear from the White House is they say that they are trying, and you may hear an ice cream truck in the back. So I apologize for that if you hear something in the back. But what the White House is saying is that they are trying to deal with supply chain issues. A big issue for used cars. One driver of inflation is that the price of used cars have gone up a whole lot, and that has to do with some supply chain issues, computer chips and things of that nature. They're trying to deal with that, help to deal with some of those supply chain issues to help bring down inflation on like used cars. They're trying to, work with different companies. They had a bunch of companies that they brought in just today because they want to talk about how can they address some of these issues. But as I said, inflation is one of those things where there's not just a magic wand that a president can wave to fix, but it is something that deeply affects people.
Wow. Well, it's really interesting. And I'm kind of an econ geek myself, so I could ask you 10 more questions on that. But I want to move on and invite our audience to join us. So if you're just tuning in, I'm Laura Knoy, along with NPR White House correspondent Ayesha Rascoe. This is Justice and Journalism, a partnership between NHPR and the Warren B. Rudman Center at the UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law. We are going to try and take as many of your questions as possible. Maybe you want to know about just what it's like to cover the White House. Maybe you have a specific question about the Biden administration. Whatever your question, use the Q&A function at the bottom of the call window, and we hope to hear from you. And Ayesha, let's go to our audience. We have hundreds and hundreds of people joining us tonight, which is wonderful. Here's someone who didn't give a name. This person says, I know there's no such thing as a, quote, normal day, but how do you structure your day so you're able to cover the administration, respond to breaking news, and make time for your family? That's a great question, given that you told us you were just at the White House an hour before we went live today. So thank you to that person for the question. Go ahead, Ayesha, please.
Every day is different. What I try to do on days when I do have to go to the White House, generally, I have 3 kids. So generally, my first shift is always getting them out the door to where they have to go. So get that done. And then, I'll head to the White House and be there all day. If I'm in what they call the pool, that's the group of reporters that follow the president around, and they're in the Oval Office and what have you. It's about 13 reporters and cameramen and such. Then everywhere that Biden goes, I will go. So yesterday he went to get ice cream. I wasn't in that pool, but if I was, I would have been with him when he went and got the Jenny's ice cream. And when he visited the small business, I would have been there. You're screaming questions at him. You're trying to, ask him about what he's going to do about Putin or what have you. And then after that, I might be on All Things Considered. I'm doing newscasts, which are about those 45-minute bites that you hear at the top of the hour, based on whatever breaking news is happening. I also may be doing a podcast. I may be trying to do interviews for a longer piece that I'm doing. And so really, and then I'm getting ready for the briefings because, during this administration, we're back with the daily briefing. That takes a lot of time to get prepared for and get ready to ask questions. So it really kind of depends from day to day what's going on. But I just try to do, my goal is always kind of just triage. Like I do the most thing that I can't ignore first, and then kind of work out from there. If you think of it as like circles, like this I have to do, and then I do the next thing and the next thing. And that's pretty much how I approach it. It is a lot. It's busy. Sometimes you don't know what's going to happen next. It is a little bit less unpredictable with the Biden administration versus the Trump administration, which was pretty unpredictable. They're a little bit, it's a little bit less of that, but it's still a lot of work. It's still a lot of news, always a lot of news. And so, you just kind of manage the best way that you can, and just try to get through the day. So that's pretty much what I try to do.
Well, Ayesha, I was really smiling when you said your first priority is to get kids out the door because I could write at least a chapter of a book about that. I remember because I interviewed a lot of presidential candidates, obviously, given New Hampshire's place in the nomination calendar. And I won't name the presidential candidate, but let's just say this person was a top tier candidate. I had to drop my then 4-year-old off at daycare. And it was just one of those days where he did not want to go. And he's hanging on my leg and doing the mommy thing. And I said to the people who worked there, doesn't anyone care that, I could be about to interview the leader of the free world? And they all looked at me and said, nope. I can 100% relate. I could tell you a million stories about that. But I'm glad you said something about the differences in covering administrations, because I wanted to ask you about that. And we also have several audience members who want to ask about that. So I'll go to their questions next. Katie writes in, you've experienced press secretaries from Sean Spicer to Sarah Huckabee Sanders to Kayleigh McEnany to Jen Psaki. How is the job of a White House correspondent impacted by the different personalities and demeanors of the press secretary? Katie, what a great question. Thank you for writing in. And go ahead, Ayesha.
No, that is a great question. It definitely, I guess it affects the job, but it really, the job remains the same, whoever's behind the lectern. And so what I do kind of remains the same, but yeah, it affects like how it gets done. During like the Sean Spicer days, like what I will say is a big difference at that point and during the whole Trump administration is that the briefings became, really this huge show, right? Like they were carried live every day. And, it was just like this huge, and coming from the last year of the Obama administration, every press briefing was not carried live. Like Joshua Earnest was the press secretary at the end. Most people probably don't remember him, but he was the press secretary at the end of the Obama administration. So when you start out with the Trump administration, the rooms were jam packed, and you think, oh well, maybe this is just going to last for a week or two. This is not going to last. But it lasted as long as they had briefings. And of course, there were times where they didn't have them. It was just kind of, it was a bit of a circus atmosphere. I will say that,
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. I will say that with press secretaries, it's always combative. It's always some back and forth. They get their, there's always, some tensions, and it should be, because you're asking them tough questions. They're defending their boss, the administration. What I will say is during the Trump administration, it did get very personal. And that's where it did feel different versus other times it felt like, yeah, going back and forth, but it wasn't like a personal attack. But it's always a little bit feisty. It's always a little bit of a back and forth. But I do think that briefings are a very good opportunity for a White House to explain where they are coming from, what their position is, why they are doing what they are doing. And if you use that properly, you can help to get your message out. It's not my job to get your message out, but that's what the White House wants to do. My job is to try to get information. And I do think sometimes White Houses forget that. Now, the briefings are not a big show because people don't carry them live every day. And so they're kind of back to being a little bit boring. But you can learn a lot at briefings. And so I do recommend that people watch them if they're really interested in politics.
We've got some audience members, Ayesha, who have specific questions about policy, and these are great. So James writes in, the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress, too, went with a few big legislative priorities in 2021 with less than 100% success. More of the same in 2022, or possibly, James asks, a different approach with multiple tailored initiatives. James, thank you for writing, because I kind of wanted to ask you a similar question to Ayesha. Wins, losses, and to be decideds so far 1 year into this administration.
Well, they got the American Rescue Act through. That was really big. That was a lot of money, helping, focused on COVID relief, got money out the door to people in the form of stimulus checks. The other huge thing that it did was the expanded child care, or not child care, the expanded child tax credit, which was refundable. So for 6 months, people got money instantaneously in their bank account, or mailed to them, and that helped to reduce child poverty. Like, it was a really big deal, and so that was something that they got done. They also got the bipartisan infrastructure bill done, and people have been talking for years about trying to get infrastructure done. It was a joke, infrastructure week. They did get it done, right? So I think you are going to see Biden visiting a lot of bridges, talking about lead pipes being removed. They're going to be telling that story. What they did not get done was the Build Back Better, and which this very large package that's very hard to describe because it had some of everything in it. Universal pre-K. They wanted the expanded child tax credit in it. There was climate change. There were a lot of things in this package, and they couldn't get it done. Now, what you heard from Biden is that they think they're going to have to maybe break it up. The difficulty with that is that you have to still have support to get it done if you break it up, right? Like, so you can't do everything that they want to do and try to get 60 votes for it. And in an election year, that's going to be even more difficult. But what they are trying to do, and what they say they are trying to do, is to break it up. It will be very interesting to see what they can actually achieve and what they can actually get signed off on to get done. Because you can't do like 50 million reconciliation bills, those are the bills where you only need 50 votes. There's like a limit on how many you can do, like 1 or 2. It's like a technical thing, but you can't do a lot of them. You only have 1 or 2 bites at that apple. So that's something that they're going to have to figure out.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Mimi wrote in with a similar question. Mimi says, what is the thought within the administration to split up the BBB bill, the Build Back Better bill, to pass parts that may be amenable to enough senators to pass? So you kind of answered that, Ayesha, but how might they break it up? Do they sort of decide that there is a big enough constituency for part X, but not part Y, so they focus on part X? Or how does that even work?
Yeah, I mean, it's they're trying to figure out what they could break up that would have enough support. Like I said, the issue is that if you break it up, and you have to get 60 votes, that's going to be tough because it's an election year, and you have to think: are you going to have 10 Republicans who are going to say, "Okay, I'm going to go along and give the Democrats a win"? And now, in an ideal time, people would just vote for what they support, right? And they wouldn't think about giving the Democrats a win, but they're going to be thinking about whether they're going to give the Democrats a win. And so, but Democrats can't let this go because it is an election year. So they have to figure out what can get the support that they need. And if they did do reconciliation, they would have to figure out, well, what can we do in a pared back bill? What would Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema sign off on? And that will likely mean some very hard choices, right? That it might not be the expanded child tax credit. They've kind of given some signals at the White House that may not be in it, even though they felt like it was very important. There may be some other things that have to go on the chopping block. And so they're going to have to do some kind of hard choices.
Wow. Well, thank you for mentioning those 2 U.S. senators, because that's a perfect segue for my next question, Ayesha, and that is about the voting rights legislation that, as you well know, was effectively killed by those 2 Democratic senators. What does that say about the control that the president has of the Democratic Party, about his ability to get some of these other priorities that you just mentioned done?
Yeah, and so that was my 4-year-old who just came in. If you saw me like motioning to the side.
I understand.
Yeah, no, I mean, so Biden has said, and this is not something that most presidents like to kind of highlight, but it is the truth that when you have 50 seat majority in the Senate, you have 50 presidents. And that really is the truth, right? So the difficulty is that they want to do something on voting rights. They say that it is imperative. They say it's an imperative for the democracy. It's what Biden is dedicated to do, but the votes are not there. They would have to change the filibuster to get it done, because you do not have Republicans who are on board. And that being the case, you don't have the Democrats, you don't have enough Democratic support to change the filibuster for this. And it's Kyrsten Sinema, and it's Kyrsten Sinema, and I don't know what, Joe Manchin. I just had a brain. And Joe Manchin, but it's not just them, right? Like, there are other Democrats who are also very reluctant about changing the filibuster, and they let Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin take the lead on that, so they don't have to take the heat themselves. And so if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. The president can, and what he has tried to do, has tried to make the case. He can try to appeal to history. But if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. And so it's not clear what else they can do. When with such a narrow majority, Biden has to try to figure out how to get lawmakers to move. And that is really like an art, not a science. And so it's not clear whether he's going to be able to get that painting done, so to speak.
Here's another question that just came in from our audience that I want to share with you, Ayesha. This is from Beth, who says, Ayesha, I appreciate all your reporting, but have really enjoyed your guest host spots on It's Been a Minute and other occasions where you have the opportunity to report and reflect on race. Beth wants to know, do you have any favorite stories you've gotten to cover, guests you've interviewed that provide an important or unexpected perspective on our efforts to confront or ignore, Beth says, our country's history of racism? Thank you so much, Beth. And go ahead, Ayesha.
Oh, that's really kind. I have, it's been really great, guest hosting on It's Been a Minute and other, on other shows. I would say that I've been really lucky to be able to talk to a lot of great people. I interviewed Brittany K. Barnett for It's Been a Minute, and she's an activist who helps to get people out of prison who are serving life sentences. She's a Black woman who helps people who are serving life sentences for nonviolent drug offenses to get them out. Her own mother was in prison, and so it was a very personal issue for her. She helped to get Alice Marie Johnson out, who was the Black woman who Trump let out during his term. Kim Kardashian advocated for that. That was talking to her about the criminal justice system and like how, the war on drugs impacted people's lives and how easily people were able to get life in prison. I mean, some of the stories that she told, it's still shocking to think about. And there are still people who are in prison right now, maybe for like a first time offense. I think still a lot of people don't know about things like that. And obviously that disproportionately affects Black and brown people. So that was a great interview, and I really, found it really enlightening. I also talked to Adam Serwer about his book, The Cruelty is the Point. It was a group of essays, and everyone talked about that phrase, the cruelty is the point, and what that meant. And he talked about really some of the group dynamics that can lead people to want to do things as a group that they would never do by themselves, that actually harm other people, and why that's the case, and the history of that. And so, that was another really good conversation that I had. And so those are just a few examples, but, I'm really thankful for a lot of the work that I've been able to do. Of course, I did 2 big projects focused on Trump's tweets, like the way he tweets about lawmakers of color and the way he tweets about Black people. And I was really grateful. I talked about one of them on on Code Switch. And so those were really big projects that I did that I'm really proud of and was really happy to do.
Wow, Beth, thank you for the question. And a related question that I had, Ayesha, you reported recently that after the racial reckoning of 2020, President Biden pledged to redouble his efforts to address systemic racism in this country. Among people who watch the president on this issue, how are they assessing his progress or lack thereof in terms of him improving the racial climate in this country?
It's a difficult thing because I think the expectation wasn't that he would, come in and, change everything that had, all the issues and systemic racism that has been, a problem for years and years and years. But there was an expectation that Biden, when it comes to police reform, when it comes to voting rights, that Biden would take action. Police reform died in the Senate. Voting rights has not passed. So I think there is frustration from activists, from different groups who wanted more from the Biden administration. Like that is a fact. What the White House will point to is they'll point to the child tax credit, which did lower child poverty and definitely helped Black children in poverty. They will point to their funding for HBCUs. They will point to the fact that they have appointed a lot of Black women judges. And one thing about this issue with Justice Breyer retiring is that if they follow through and nominate the first Black woman to be on the Supreme Court, that is another thing that they will be able to say that we did do this for Black people, that we have nominated a Black woman to the Supreme Court, because there are a lot of concerns. And even Biden said, and I'll just wrap up real quick, but even Biden said last week that he felt like that his message had not gotten out to Black people. He acknowledged that he needs to be more on the ground. He needs to be doing more face-to-face interactions, because he said at his press conference that he has not been out enough to tell his story to make his case.
Yeah, I heard him say that. That was interesting. And HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Is that right, Ayesha?
Yes, historically
Yeah.
Black colleges and universities. Yes.
So this is the third White House that you have covered, having worked for Reuters, as you said, before coming to NPR. Now, setting aside the obvious political differences between President Trump and President Biden, what about the mechanics of covering these two administrations, Ayesha? What sort of day-to-day nuts and bolts differences did you experience?
Well, yeah, as I said, so when I came into the Obama administration, they were at the very end. So they've been around for 8 years, they kind of knew what they were doing. When the Trump administration came in, you had a lot of people who were not very used to government. You had, a totally new crew. And then you had Trump, who was just not someone who wants to, color within the lines all the time, right? Like, he doesn't want to always follow the rules. So he wants to do what he wants to do. So you had a situation where the White House was extremely unpredictable, because you had an unpredictable president. He wanted to tweet at all times of the night. He liked setting the agenda. He considered himself to be his own best spokesperson. So that's what so he wanted to talk to the press, not necessarily have his press secretary talking to the press, and he would contradict them. So you might hear one thing from one person and another thing from another person. That was just the nature of that White House. You did have Trump, who did talk to the press a lot. When he loved to talk to the press when he was heading to the helicopter. He would stand there and hold court. That was different. Obama didn't do that. very much at all, almost never. But yeah, Trump liked to stand court and do kind of chopper talk. When it comes to the Biden administration, you have people who have been in the White House. A lot of these people have been there before. So you got a very experienced White House. You have a White House that loves fact sheets and bullet points and preview calls. They love to hold a call. They love to do a rollout. So there's a different structure to things. And Biden, he doesn't always stick to the script, obviously, but he is not going to tweet something, that's going to change the whole day. Like, he's not going to make an announcement necessarily via tweet. They're not going to just do a rollout, at 3:00 in the afternoon. They say, he's not going to tweet something at 3:00 in the afternoon, and then you have to run around. What does that mean? And they're not going to do that. They're going to have their call. They're going to set things up. So it's a different format. Like, it's just a different way of getting information out, really. And they're much more disciplined right now. That may change as far as leaks and as far as, just staying on message. They do stay pretty much on message in the Biden administration. They're much more of a stickler for things like that. So that's really the big major differences.
Wow, a whole different ballgame. And Herb actually writes in with a question sort of about the mechanics of reporting and how you go about it, Ayesha. Herb says, what techniques of self-checking or other methods do you use to maintain your objectivity when faced with a subject that is clearly peddling disinformation? Herb, this is a conundrum for a lot of journalists. So thank you for writing in. Go ahead, Ayesha, please.
It's very difficult. And I think the media and reporters at large are trying to figure out like the best way to deal with it. A lot of times there's this idea, like there is a question, and there are times where I do have to ask myself, if something is not true, then I have to think about, why am I going to repeat it? And if I'm going to repeat it to debunk it, is this necessary for me to repeat to debunk it? Because sometimes, even if you're debunking it or saying it's not true, you still are putting that untrue thing out there, and people sometimes don't remember that you said it wasn't true. One thing that we have tried to do is try to do truth sandwiches, where you say the truth, then you say the untrue thing, then you say it's not true again, to make sure to really try to drive home the point that this is not true. But I do try to think about it. And if something doesn't need to be repeated, then I try not to repeat it. Because there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation out there. And as a reporter, I don't want to be spreading that. If you say something about me, like, well, Ayesha Rascoe is not an axe murderer, that doesn't necessarily, you still
right. All you hear are the words Roscoe and axe murderer, right?
Yeah, you're still putting the idea out there. So that's not really very helpful. So you have to think about that. And I'm not an axe murderer. I'm not. I'm just saying, I just did that as an example. So you want to try. So I try not to do that and to be thoughtful about that.
Wow, a truth sandwich. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, no, we talked about that, especially, obviously this came up a lot during the last administration, but that was one thing that was talked about as a way to address it, is to try to do a truth sandwich where you're stating the truth twice and then putting the mistruth, the thing that's not true, in the middle. Yeah.
Well, again, if you're just joining us, I'm Laura Knoy, along with NPR White House correspondent Ayesha Rascoe. This is Justice and Journalism, a partnership between NHPR and the Warren B. Rudman Center at the UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law. And if you want to join us with a question for Ayesha about the Biden administration, or just what it's like to cover the White House, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the call window. Great questions, Ayesha, coming in from our audience. Here's one from Ken, who says, what can reporters like yourself do, and what can the rest of us do to create a more respectful and fact-based public discourse? Wow, Ken, that's a weighty question and a great one. Go ahead, Ayesha, just broad thoughts there, please.
I mean, it's a very important question, and it's also a very difficult question. I think that we're all grappling with. I do try to exercise respect and restraint when I'm talking to and about people. I try not to just engage in, well, I don't engage in name calling and things of that nature. And I try to make sure that I'm not adding to the negativity that is often out there, especially, sorry about that, that is, out there in the world. But it's difficult because we do live in an age where the person or the account, social media account that is most kind of outrageous and, negative sentiments travel a lot faster than positive sentiments on social media. Like, that's been studied. So, if you are kind of blasting something, that is going to unfortunately go a lot further and a lot faster than if you're, just saying that you're happy about something. And so I think that it really is a difficult challenge in the world that we live in now, because there is so much polarization. There's so much, just people don't look at each other's humanity. And so I do want, with my reporting and my work and with the way that I live and operate, to make sure that we're treating everybody with dignity and respect, and honoring their humanity. And so that's what I can hope to do. Like, and I hopefully, maybe as more people do it and keep that in mind as individuals, it can make a difference. But I don't have the larger answer, but I think it's something that we have to keep grappling with.
Wow, yeah, it's a profound question. And again, I really appreciate all these questions from our audience. They're great. I did want to make sure, Ayesha, that we talked about climate change. Many Democrats were really, really hoping that President Biden would make climate change a huge priority, especially after 4 years of the Trump administration, where it was not a priority. What's the feeling now, Ayesha, among Democrats about the focus that President Biden has had on this issue?
Well, I mean, there's a great deal of disappointment after, not getting the climate change, measures in the Build Back Better plan. They have not given up hope. That is one of the areas where they are looking at, maybe there are things that they can break off. A part of this, or a lot of this, may be focusing on funding, kind of like the carrots, like the tax credits, things that you can do to help promote cleaner energy, things of that nature, versus, because you've already had Joe Manchin, who is from West Virginia, is a very coal heavy state. He has already pretty much said that he has a problem with policies that would be more punishing for fossil fuels. And so trying to get that through with Joe Manchin in the Senate, and you got 50 senators, and you need every single one, that's probably not going to happen. So what they're trying to do is try to figure out, can they get tax credits through? Can they get, some money and funding and things through that could make a difference? But there is a lot of frustration, just like with a lot of other issues, that the climate change issue, this was supposed to be something where Biden was going to be able to make a very big difference, make a huge investment in something that is, something that is a huge issue for the world, and an existential issue for the world, but it's run into politics.
Another question I really did want to make sure we got to was about Afghanistan. This was a huge shift in policy that did occur in the Biden administration, and that is the U.S. withdrawal, as you know, from Afghanistan after more than 20 years. The withdrawal, as you know, did involve the deaths of some U.S. service members and Afghan civilians, though, as well, including children. What repercussions, Ayesha, have you seen on this presidency, if any, in terms of this, less than perfect withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I think that some of the repercussions are probably still playing out. It definitely raised a lot of questions about the Biden administration's handling of foreign policy, and that's only getting tougher with Russia and Ukraine. But it raised questions of competence, and it raised questions of whether they're able to handle of the US's stature on the world stage. That said, the White House is defensive of the decision. They basically have made the argument that this was a difficult decision, but it was one that needed to be made, that obviously they are not happy or not pleased with the loss of life, and certainly not the loss of US soldiers. But they argue, and Biden did argue publicly last week, that they had to get out because they would have had to put more resources and more soldiers into Afghanistan. It had been 20 years, and that it was time to get out. And so they view it as Biden doing the hard thing that other presidents had been unwilling to do, and that he was willing to take the hit for doing it because he truly believed it was the right thing. But yeah, it definitely has taken a toll on him. I think on his public image, not that Americans are probably not thinking about Afghanistan first of mind right now, but having that happen over the summer when you had Delta, and look, you just had a lot of bad news since that time. You haven't had a lot of wins to offset that. That was the start of a very rough couple of months for the Biden administration. And I think they're still struggling to get back on their footing after what happened in Afghanistan.
Looking ahead to the midterm elections, here we are, 2022, they're coming. What do Democrats want this White House to do that will help them out come November?
I mean, I think Democrats want some legislation passed so that they can be able to go home and say that we did this. They did get the infrastructure passed, but they want to be able to say that they did more than that. Even though infrastructure is really big, they want to be able to say that they delivered for their constituents. So I think it's not clear what exactly that's going to look like. But that's what, Democrats want to be able to do. They also want to be able to say that the White House is getting the coronavirus under control, because that's always going to be a huge issue at this point. So, sending out the test, that's something that polls really well. The COVID test, that's something that polls really, really well. Giving out masks, that's something else that polls really well. I think that's what they want the White House to do. What Democrats really need, in addition to that, is they need inflation to start going down. They need cases to get a bit under control. They need some of those external things to start going their way. It's still going to be an uphill battle because, as we all know, it's very difficult for the president's party in the midterms. Like that's a very difficult thing. But they need some things to start going in their direction, especially when it comes to the economy and especially when it comes to COVID.
We have a couple questions, Ayesha, getting back to what you talked about at the beginning, just your own path towards journalism and how you approach your craft of journalism. Here's one from someone who didn't give a name. This person says, you said you were already interested in journalism when you were very young. Were there any particular journalists who were your models or heroes? And that's a great question. Thank you.
That is a great question. Like I said, I actually, I read a lot of hip hop journalism. I read a lot of like Vibe magazine and Double XL. So like Dream Hampton was someone who I really liked. She actually is the woman who helped do the Surviving R. Kelly series. She was very big back then doing Vibe magazine and stuff like that. Danielle Smith, like she was editor-in-chief of Vibe magazine. So I was like really into that. Like, and I, like if anyone ever watched Living Single, like Queen Latifah's character on that show. Like, that's what I thought of when I thought of journalism, like really kind of cool. I'm at a magazine. I didn't end up doing magazine journalism, but I took a different path, but that was the kind of things that I really liked, the way they told stories, the way they asked questions. And I was really into, newspapers, prints, writing. So I didn't listen to the radio as much or watch as much TV news, because I really was like, I'm going to be a writer. I'm not going to do broadcasts. I was wrong about that, but that's what I thought in middle school. So those were some of the people that I idolized growing up.
Well, you never know
You never know.
where the path will take you. I mean, you clearly enjoy talking about, pop culture and other subjects, and you mentioned hosting for some other NPR shows earlier in our conversation. So what are some of your favorite subjects to cover, Ayesha?
I always say I can pretty much talk about anything, but I love to tell people stories. Like, anybody who has like an interesting life or story or career or thing, like I love to do that. And I can kind of take different forms. Like, I did a story about Black funeral homes, and I talked to a Black funeral home director who just had great stories about being in that industry, and how Black funeral home directors played such a big role in the civil rights movement, because they had money and limousines and cars, so they would be the ones driving around Martin Luther King and stuff like that, and when they came into town. So I love telling those types of stories. As far as other subjects like that I just have fun with, outside of like politics, I love horror movie shows. I talked about Yellow Jackets on Weekend Edition. That was a lot of fun. I love that show. I interviewed Melanie Linsky. So anything like horror, thriller, like if I could talk about that, or if I can find any excuse to talk about reality TV, I also really like doing that. So those are some of the things that I, just love to do, and talk about Beyonce. That's also fun. So anything like that.
I'm with you on some of the aspects that you mentioned. The horror movies, that's never been a thing. We have a couple questions, just really reflective, from our listeners who want to know sort of how you're thinking and feeling now, given this divisive environment. And here's a really thoughtful one that came in from Lucy in Durham that I would love to share with you. So thank you, Lucy, for that. She says, I feel like Americans are more divided than ever before, and it's hard to see how we can move beyond the divisiveness and start to find common ground again. Moreover, Lucy says, I see Americans as incredibly impatient and unyielding. She says, I always find your reporting informative, but sometimes discouraging, not from your presentation, Ayesha, but from the facts you are reporting on. And Lucy wants to know, and we're getting kind of Oprah-esque here, but why not? How do you keep yourself from getting discouraged in your journalism and your reporting? And Lucy, just thank you so much for writing in. And Ayesha, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a very real question. I'm a human being just like everybody else. So sometimes the news is depressing. When you're, covering the pandemic, and during 2020 with the protests and all of that, those were very rough, heavy weeks, and months, and so I would never say that it didn't affect me at all, and that there weren't times where I felt discouraged, or that I felt just worried and anxious like everybody else. And sometimes it is hard as a journalist, because you can't look away necessarily. It's your job, it's your day to day, so you can't just not deal with the news and turn it off. And so that is tough. I think that part of what I've had to do is really to make sure that I'm taking care of myself. People talk about self-care all the time, but it really is important to try to take some time. And if you need some help, or if you need a moment, or if we need a break, to do that and to seek that out. I also try to make sure that I'm able to, with the work that I do, try to see like a brighter side to it. And I often say, like, I want to bring joy to people, not like some blind optimism, but this idea that, even though things are rough and they are difficult, and life can be rough and difficult, if we are up and we are alive and we have another day, we might as well make the best of it, right? Like that's what I want to bring in the work that I do and the life that I live, is that, look, we here, so let's make the best of it. Let's do what we got to do. And so I hope that I can bring that sort of joy and that sort of attitude, that's not necessarily based on the circumstances, but just based on the idea that let's try to make it a little bit lighter, as we can and as we go, and try to help people. But yeah, as a human being, it's tough sometimes.
Wow, that's a great way actually to wrap it up. I don't think we can improve upon that, Ayesha. Lucy, thank you for the question. And boy, Ayesha Rascoe, I said at the outset, but I really hope that someday this thing will be over and you can get on a plane and come up to New Hampshire and visit us again, because it's just been wonderful to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I would love to come to New Hampshire. It would be great. I really would love to do it. So hopefully, when the Omicron is gone, we can, I can make a visit.
Come in the fall. It's really
Yes.
pretty here then. It's always pretty, but especially in the fall. I also want to give a big thanks to our virtual audience. It's wonderful that so many people signed up and attended this event. And I want to remind everybody that Justice and Journalism is an ongoing partnership between NHPR and the Warren B. Rudman Center at the UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law. We look forward to another installment in this series in the not too distant future, hopefully in person with a virtual element for those of you who couldn't physically come in. This conversation will be broadcast on NHPR on Monday, January 31st at 1 p.m. and again at 9 p.m. Thanks to everybody for being with us.